Principia Chapter 3. Cherry and Jasmine recoiled in horror as the witch began advancing towards them across the kitchen. "You dare call me ugly?" the old crone growled, closing the distance between them. "No, sorry, Mrs. Bogbean," the girls murmured nervously. "Silence!" Mildred exclaimed, spittle spraying from her wizened mouth and her milky eyes gleaming with rage. "I'll teach you a lesson in manners you won't soon forget," Mildred hissed. "Just you wait a minute, Mrs. Bogbean. Now look here," Dominic declared suddenly, finding his voice. "We have invited you into our house, given you shelter from the rain and something to fill your stomach, and this is how you show your gratitude, is it?" The witch stopped moving and turned a cold, dead eye towards him, sending shivers of fear running up and down his back. "Your family has insulted me, mortally offended me, and I demand satisfaction," she replied in low tones, her voice like a whisper on a grave. Cinnamon couldn't take any more of the worry and strain, and fainted away in the corner of the kitchen, slumping to the floor. Dominic was just about to race across the room to her side when there came a noise like cracking pavement slabs. It was coming from the witch. Dominic and the children all looked at her in shock. Slowly she was beginning to recoil from her stooping posture, her back uncurling with creaks and crunches, her legs straightening and her shoulders lifting until she was standing so tall the top of her head was near the ceiling. She was the tallest person any of them had ever seen before, and she didn't seem quite so weak and frail. She twirled her cloak staff around in her hand before tucking it neatly into her belt in her robes. Just as the two girls and the man were standing mesmerised at the sight of it all, she bounded across the kitchen in one leap and snatched up the children. "Stop! What are you doing?" Dominic shouted, panic in his voice. The witch paid him no mind and didn't stop to reply. Holding a girl under each arm like a loaf of bread, she exploded through the back door of the cottage and began running down the garden path. "Cinnamon, Cinnamon," Dominic panted, shaking his wife vigorously by the shoulders. "Quickly, wake up!" With a groan, Cinnamon came round and looked about her in confusion. "Quickly, my love, we've got to run. The witch has our girls," Dominic explained hurriedly, and made a dash out of the door and across the garden, his wife soon giving chase. "I'll teach these brats a lesson about respecting their elders and betters," the witch cackled as she vaulted over the garden gate. "I'll make the whole village despise these little pipsqueaks." Puffing and gasping, Dominic stumbled down the gravel path and crashed into the fence at the bottom. The witch was still in sight, his daughter shrieking and wailing under her arms. He was exhausted already. He hadn't had so much exercise since he was a boy, and it was hard work indeed. But he couldn't give up, not for an instant. Cinnamon was just catching up with him as he swung the gate wide and began stumbling down the road, breathing heavily. "Oh, Dom, the girls!" she sobbed, clutching her apron as she ran after the witch. "Whatever will we do?" Dominic was far too out of breath to reply with anything other than a tired grunt. He just kept on trotting and staggering as fast as he could go. The witch's heavy boots pounded grooves into the dirt road as she thundered along with mighty strides. The girls felt as though their teeth were being shaken loose from their heads as each footfall hammered into the earth. They were soon so winded they couldn't even shout for help anymore, and all they could do was clutch hold of the witch's bony arms out of sheer terror and close their eyes very tightly. "What will become of you, my pretty girls?" the witch croaked, churling cruelly. "Perhaps I shall run all the way to the south cliffs and toss you into the rolling sea. Perhaps I'll run all the way to the northern mountains and hurl you into the belly of a volcano. The girl squeaked and screamed pitifully as she kept running. No, I think what I have in mind is much more fun, much more terrible, she screeched hysterically. I haven't had this much entertainment in years. The witch leaped over a hedgerow and flew over a ditch. She darted through shrubs and gorse bushes as though they weren't even there. But the thorns snagged and scratched at the hair and clothes of the little girls as they yelped with pain. The witch paused as the crest of the hill glanced down. She could see in front of her the tattered, thatched roofs of the village of Nark. They were nearly there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Further back on the path, Dominic and Cinnamon were still giving chase. Dominic felt as though his lungs were going to collapse with exhaustion, and even Cinnamon was beginning to slow down a little bit. They didn't dare stop, though. They were far too worried about Cherry and Jasmine for that. The witch was still just in sight, and by the look of things, heading for Nark. Although why she was going there and what she was going to do, they just didn't know. "Stop!" wheezed Dominic as he limped to the top of a hill, but the witch was already at the bottom at the bottom and running across the field. Cinnamon had overtaken him. She was so angry and upset she barely even noticed how worn out and tired she was, and just kept on running and running as fast as she was able to go. "Wait for me!" Dominic exclaimed. Cinnamon slowed her speed so that he could catch up, but when she slowed down, she realised just how upset and scared she was, and suddenly started to cry. "Oh dear," Dominic said, catching up with her. He wasn't very good at knowing what to say in these sorts of situations. It wasn't that he was particularly a nasty person. He just didn't know why his wife cried so much, or what to do when she did. There, he said after a moment's thought, and patted her on the arm. "Everything will be fine, I'm sure, darling. We really must be making a move now, though. She's going to be in Nark by now, and goodness knows what she'll be doing then." Cinnamon began to cry even harder, and Dominic felt very out of his depth. "Right, come on then, my sweet," he added, finding energy within himself to start running again. Cinnamon sobbed and sniffed, but followed after him at a quick trot. They stumbled their way down the steep bank of the hillside. Soon the village of Nark was appearing around them. Ramshackle cottages and run-down shops. Villagers were pouring out of every building in every street to see what all the fuss was about. Mr. Crookfield, the blacksmith, stopped hammering. Mrs. Marigold, the baker, dropped a whole tray of buns in surprise, and anyone and everyone stopped what they were doing and followed the noise. The witch had reached the centre of Nark, and was even now hollering and roaring for attention, while the girl struggled and screamed in her grasp. Dwarves, half-elves, humans, and half-ogres all began assembling around the announcement platform in the village square. The witch had climbed on top of the little wooden stage and was hopping impatiently from foot to foot. The villagers, of course, had all seen the witch before. They knew what she was like, and they always tried to stay out of her way. If Dominic Treehorn hadn't have been so antisocial and unneighbourly, then it is almost certain that they would have warned him about her before now. But it was far too late for that now. Soon the crowd had gathered around the platform, and the mutterings and whisperings began to die down. The witch cast a beady eye across the villagers, and they all felt afraid. Dominic and Cinnamon began to try and push their way through the group to get to the front, but people weren't moving out of the way. They were so busy watching and listening. "Villagers of Nark," the witch intoned gravely, "I have come hither this day, bringing with me 2 repugnant, monstrous children who have most savagely wronged me." The gathering throng muttered nervously to each other, dreading what dangers might lay ahead. "Stop her, please, someone," Cinnamon exclaimed desperately, fighting her way through the mass. The witch sneered. "I dare any of you to try. Be you the strongest, the tallest, or the bravest. Only fools would attempt to best me in combat. All of you well know that I can turn your bones to ashes. The crowd nodded and fell silent. They did know this very well indeed, and no one would even think about trying to attack Mildred Bogbean. This child, the witch continued venomously, lifting Cherry into the air, accused me, of being ugly. The silence continued. Mildred's eyes flashed with anger, and quickly the crowd exclaimed, "Oh no, Mildred, you're so beautiful." The old crow nodded contentedly at this before continuing. For her crime, both girls will pay with their lives, she cracked cruelly. No, shrieked Cinnamon and Dominic in despair. But you can't, said Mrs. Marigold, almost by accident. She covered her mouth up and tried to hide. Can't? Mildred spat. Can't? What she meant, your magnificence, said Mr. Root the tailor. What she meant was that they're innocent, aren't they? Well, they are, aren't they? And there's there's magic laws and all that. I should boil your blood for your insolence, Mildred fumed. But you're right. I can't kill these children. The laws of magic forbid it, and that angers me. But don't think for one moment that I shall spare their lives. No, indeed. I knew I would be able to kill them myself, and I never intended to. That's why I called you all here before me. She smiled wickedly. I called you here because it will be you who ends their wretched lives. The villagers gasped in shock and took a step back away from the platform. Surely not, declared one of them in horror. You don't think so? Mildred sneered. We shall see. I think you'll change your mind soon enough. When your own bellies are empty and your children are weeping with hunger, then we shall see what you are willing to do. You monster! Cinnamon shouted. The witch continued to smirk and ignored her. Raising both of the girls into the air, the witch released her grasp on them, and they remained hovering in front of her. From her belt she slid her gnarled oak staff and gripped it tightly in her crooked hand for a moment before slamming it loudly against the platform with an explosive bang. Instantly, the end of the staff began to glow a deep and ominous red, which bloomed out into a glowing orb of scarlet light. The sun seemed to dim in the sky, the birds fell deathly silent in the treetops, and not a breeze stirred the leaves. In the awful stillness, the witch's voice rang out bitterly and steadily. These children's lives, so frail and small, are hardly worth a thing at all. But if you think their lives are good, whilst their hearts beats, there'll be no food. In every shop and field and home, your wares will turn to sticks and stones. Because of the offence they gave, the villagers will dig their grave. And when you've ended all their pain, everyone may eat again. Another blast sounded out of the end of the staff as she pounded it into the wood of the dais once again. Some of the villagers started to cry, and everyone looked upset and afraid. Cinnamon and Dominic most of all. The daughters remained floating in the air near Mildred until suddenly she clapped her hands, and without warning, the pair vanished.